Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about how to document a letter to file. So, for those of you that don't know what a letter to file is, when you get FDA 510K clearance or de novo, when your product is marketed in the US and you have that FDA device market authorization so you can sell your product, you're going to make changes to the product. If you have an electromedical device, you're going to have some components that are going to become obsolete. You're going to have to swap them for newer versions of the component, maybe even find a new supplier. If you have regulations change, you might have to update the labeling. You might update your software and add a feature to it. You're going to have to do bug fixes to software. You're going to have to put in patches to address cybersecurity vulnerabilities. You might even have a sterile device and you add a new sterilization method. So you have to go through the process of determining whether your device modification you've made, whether it's minor or major, requires a 510K or not. And the FDA doesn't do it the same way the rest of the world does. And every country has their own guidance on it. And they don't say significant change. What they say is these changes require a new submission. These changes, based on our flowchart and decision tree, do not require a 510K in documentation only. And a lot of people don't know what type of documentation it should be. In the FDA guidance, it just says that you should update your documentation. And that is understood as being updating your device master record, DMR, or technical documentation, not your DHF. The DHF is for a design project. It starts when you first start designing, ends when you finish with the 510K clearance or de novo. But any changes you make after that, if it doesn't require a new 510K, would be documented in your DMR, and you would have, typically companies will call it an engineering change notice. Or an engineering change order. ECOs or ECNs, they'll document the change on that, justify why they don't need to do a new submission, and then they will go ahead and implement the change. But if the decision tree, as you go through the decision tree that the FDA provides in their guidance, says, nope, this is a big change that you will require a 510K for, then you're going to have to start a new design history file, and it's just going to be for that change. So you're going to have a new plan, but you're probably not going to have any new design inputs unless you're changing one of the features of the product, like a new indication, or you're adding a new feature that requires performance testing, new sterilization method. Those would be things that might change the inputs. But most of the changes we make, they only affect the outputs. So same testing plan, same testing requirements, different design plan because it's a shorter project with a lot less detail because you already have 510K clearance for the product. And you're going to change your outputs and redo some or potentially all of your testing. But if it's a letter to file, that means the file that you're updating is your device master record or technical file, not your design history file. And you don't have to submit something to the FDA, but you might consider making it clear that this is a new model or a new version of the product. Some companies will put a version number on the product. Some people will give it a new model number. Sometimes they keep them the same because the change is so minor it won't even be noticed by the customer. And it might be reverse compatible with all the previous versions of the product. So those are some of the decisions you have to make, but you follow the FDA's guidance document step by step by step, and you have to document each of those decisions. So what we did is we actually created a procedure for that process specifically. Any kind of changes, when you look on our website, and I will share my screen here. When you look on our website, there's a heading for turnkey QMS procedures. We go to that page and we scroll down to procedure number 6. That's change control. And it says a webinar bundle. We've got a webinar for training and then a webinar explaining how to edit that procedure for implementing it for the first time. So there's actually 2 webinars for it. But in here, we explain what documents go with that. And one of those is this template 29 letter to file or LTF template for 510K cleared devices. That's one of the forms that you fill in. The second form you fill in is called FRM012. That's a change note. Some people will call that an ECO form or an ECN form. It's just whatever name you gave it, but that documents those changes. So if you're interested in what we use and you want updates to it, you'd purchase this procedure. And you purchase right down here by adding to cart. Now I'm going to show you what you get when you buy it. So here are all the documents in a Dropbox folder. We would be sharing that with you. We can also share it via monday.com or by email if you don't want to have a Dropbox account. You just need to let us know that, because that's our default way of sharing it with you when you purchase. So just email us. I don't have a Dropbox account. Can you email it to me? Or I don't have a Dropbox account. Can you share it with me on monday.com? And we'll make you a guest to a project that has monday.com in there. And we can do that for as many procedures as you need to purchase from us. In fact, that's how we do our turnkey quality systems. We share them one at a time and use that for project management, implementing the turnkey quality system. But in here are those two forms. Here's the letter to file at the bottom, and at the top we have the change note. So I'm going to show you the change note first. So this is a copy of our change note procedure. And the first thing you'll notice at the very top, it says who's making the change, what the date is, the product, the process. You might not be making a process change. You might just be making a product change. And then you want to describe what the reason for it is. Like, is this a corrective action due to a recall or a CAPA or a complaint? That'd be an important detail to document. This is where you would reference an MDR or a complaint number if that's the source of why you're doing this. It could be you identified a software vulnerability, a cybersecurity vulnerability, and that's the reason. So you want to indicate what the source of this is. It could just be a new and improved version of the product, and say that. Now we've got all these check boxes under here. You'd like to only check one box. Chances are that's not going to happen. Usually there's more than one thing that you have to update when you're making a design change to your product. You might check off the design one right here. That would make a lot of sense. And I can do that just by changing properties here, and instead of not checked, make it checked. So that now I've indicated that's one of the types of change here. But chances are I'm also going to have to update other things. It might require the instruction for use get updated. It might require updating my risk management file. It might require updating my labeling. It might be a new supplier change. It might be all of the above. So yes, you're probably going to have more than one thing. And it would be shocking to me to have a design change and not have the DMR or technical file index change at the same time. So you can almost count on both of those should be checked. If it's a design change, you're not going to do just one, you're going to do both. So we have all these check boxes here for a reason, to remind you, oh yeah, I have to update that. That's very important. You might even be installing a new piece of equipment. We're going from sealing blisters to sealing pouches. I talked with a client earlier today about that. Well, you're still going to have to do your IQ. You're going to have to update your procedure on how you do the sealing. You're going to have to do an IQ, maybe an OQ, maybe a PQ. Maybe you are going to change the label design. Before it was designed for a small space on your blister. Now it's designed for a different size label that's going to go on a pouch. Maybe it's smaller, maybe it's bigger. So you're probably going to have a new supplier for these pouches, a new supplier for your sealer. Maybe you have equipment now that has different calibration and maintenance requirements. So it's possible that every single one of these boxes will get checked. So a change is not a little project. It's like a mini design project. And that's why sometimes these require full design projects, starting with a design plan going all the way to regulatory approval. Sometimes they don't, and you can make a justification for why you don't need regulatory approval, because it falls within the FDA guidelines of this is something that's documentation only. And the documentation would be this form plus the letter to file form justifying why a new submission is not required. And this is not a one-page form, it's a 4-page form. The items in red are instructions, the items in green are examples of what you might put in there. And this might expand longer and longer as you fill it in. It might, instead of being 4 pages, it might be 6 or 7 pages. There might be attachments, there might be drawings. supplier approvals. You want to make sure everything that was associated with it is included in that folder. And it might be a virtual folder in Dropbox or SharePoint, or it might be in Google Drive, or it might be paper. So you might put it actually in an ECO folder physically and have all hard copies of the document in there. And yes, it does take a long time to do all this paperwork, and it is a lot of paperwork, but it's necessary because one of the first questions out of the FDA's mouth when they're looking at design controls is, let me see your procedure. That's number one. Number two, let me see your design history file for this specific product. They usually pick a specific project, not all of your products. That's too much. So they sample one of them, usually not the one they looked at last time, a different one. And then they ask for what changes have you made since your 510K clearance. That's important because they want, and they might say since the last time we were here, or that might be since the 510K clearance, but they want to know what changes you made, and they want to make their own assessment of whether you should have done a 510K or not. And if you have that letter to file documentation, that will support your decision. They may not agree, but most of the time, if you've documented it correctly, the inspector won't have the issue. They just may ask for copies of that and send that to the Office of Device Evaluation to say, is this okay, or should they have done a 510K? If Office of Device Evaluation and the inspector says, no, you need to submit a 510K, you say, okay, I will. That's what you do. You've already done the validation. You've already got all your documentation. Just means you need to pay a user fee for a 510K and organize everything in a new 510K format and send it off. And it shouldn't take you that long because you've already done the hard work. You've already done all the testing and the documentation. It's just fill out a 510K and pay your user fee. But you have to fill all this stuff in, and there's a lot of work. Supplier changes are here, qualification and validation, regulatory approvals. This is where you would reference your letter to file for why you're not, or you would say, yes, we have submitted for regulatory approval and our 510K is attached. We have an other category. If you don't have anything other, you could say there's NA, nothing else. Monitoring and assessment. This would be particularly important if it was related to a CAPA or a complaint, something like that. Then you would monitor to see if it was effective. We have CAPA effectiveness checks. So that's why you would need that monitoring and assessment. And you want to say specifically what lots or serial numbers you looked at to make sure it was effective. And then you have approvals of it, typically the quality manager, but there'd be other people that would approve it as well. And then we have our implementation. So this would indicate who's going to do it, when it's going to be done, initials and dates. You might even attach a plan that's a written plan with dates. So that's very important. There's a lot of stuff there to do. And so you want to plan it out logically and have somebody tracking that effectiveness of it. So you might use Monday.com as a way of documenting all this, or some other project management tool. And then the last part is the actual monitoring. So you would have the plan first. These are the things that we have to modify. Step 2, here's our implementation dates, and we're documenting them as we implement them. And then the monitoring the change after it's fully implemented. And that's the end of the change note. Now we're going to go to the letter to file. So the letter to file follows exactly in order of the 2 guidance documents. The first part is device modifications that are not related to software, so anything else. And then the second guidance is just software modifications. And at the beginning, you're repeating a lot of the information that was in your engineering change, so you can copy and paste if you filled in the engineering change already. Or if you fill this in first, you might copy it from here over to the engineering change note. You would indicate what the reason is, how you're going to assess it. It even lists the 2 guidance documents here, so you can search those on Google and look them up. And then you're going to answer questions on risk management, design change assessment, and your conclusion, do or do not require additional submission activity. But then we have approvals for this, and then you actually have the actual flow chart where we have the exact questions that are in the guidance document in the same questions they ask yes or no. If the answer is yes, new 510K. The answer is no, go to the next question. Every single question they ask, we've got in here. The first one's the main flow chart questions in their decision tree. And then the next one is flow chart A, all the subpoints. flowchart B, all the subpoints, flowchart C, all the subpoints, and D. And these 4 charts, it's good to know overall what things go on what flowchart. So A is all about labeling. So if you change the label, you have to go through A. Well, there aren't too many changes you're going to make that aren't going to require some kind of label change, but a lot of times they're very minor changes, so they don't require, most of these answers would be no for a very minor label change. If you're just changing a component on a printed circuit board, probably no label change at all, unless you're going to be changing a model number or something. And in those cases, you wouldn't have any labeling changes. You would check not applicable at the top. The next kind of changes would be technology, engineering, or performance changes. If you were changing that same component on a printed circuit board, that's almost certainly going to be a technology or engineering change. You're not really changing the technology, it's re-engineering the board, redesigning that board. If it doesn't affect performance, you have like for like in terms of components and performance, then you don't have to worry about the performance changes. But a lot of times with software, we're trying to improve the performance. And if you're adding a new feature, that would be a performance change. A new software feature, a new hardware feature, those are going to be performance changes. So keep those in mind. If you change an energy source, like you're going from mains powered, plug it into the wall, to battery powered, or adding battery powered, so you have the option of either or, that would be an example of this second item, B2. Materials changes. So a lot of times we're changing materials. We're going from one plastic to another plastic, or metal to plastic, to make it less expensive. And a lot of times you just repeat your biocompatibility testing and you're on your way. No need to do a new 510K because you're just changing the material and you've redone the testing that would normally be required for the same acceptance criteria. But it's not always the case, depending on what the material is. For instance, with an IVD, you might have something that's a strip on a flow-through assay, and that might affect the performance significantly, and they may want you to resubmit. And then we have a section D for just diagnostics, IVDs. And then we have the other guidance for software. This basically falls into 6 different categories, but the first 2, is it a change that you made for cybersecurity? So you found a vulnerability and you're patching it. Or is this a bug that appeared? For example, the operating system was updated and it no longer works with your software. You update your software so it has the right drivers for that new operating system, and problem's gone away. You didn't add a new feature, you didn't change your interface, you didn't make any new claims. You're just updating an unseen driver so it works correctly with the operating system. That's bringing it back into compliance, returning the system into the specification that you had originally. So yes, documentation only. So usually 1 and 2 don't result in a new 510K, but most of the other changes do trigger a new 510K. A perfect example is you're currently in iOS and you're going to add Android. That requires re-engineering your software for a completely new operating system. That's what they mean by re-engineering. That's typically going to be a new 510K. And it could potentially be an abbreviated 510K or a special 510K. A special 510K would be a much shorter review time, but most of the time you have to change multiple things and people want to add a feature to the software. Now we're looking at a traditional submission. So filling in each of these questions with the check boxes, and don't pretend that, well, I'm going to answer this because I really don't want to do a 510K. That's not the point here. You're supposed to do this, answer this honestly, answer these questions with full awareness of what the guidance means, and then make the decision. Unfortunately, this means we have to submit. Oh, well, take your lumps, because the other thing you got to keep in mind is cumulative changes. Not only do we have individual changes, but you could say no 510K required, letter to file. The next change you make, no 510K, letter to file. But every single time you do that, the cumulative changes you've made since the last 510K are significant enough that cumulatively the FDA wants you to have a new 510K. So what have I seen some companies try to get away with? There was one company that tried to get away with 40 years of changes and no new 510K. Didn't work. They got themselves a warning letter. So that's not going to work. What's reasonable? Well, the FDA inspects you every 2 years, and they're going to ask, how many changes have you made in those last 2 years? If you got 6 or 10 changes, probably need a new 510K. So maybe before the FDA inspector comes, submit a 510K. They have something called a catch-up 510K. Each individual change was a minor change, didn't require a 510K, but cumulatively we think we might need one. So we're going to do a catch-up 510K. You're not holding up market at launch. You've already made the market launch, but cumulatively you're like, we're a little bit at risk here. Let's avoid that 483 observation. Let's just submit a catch-up 510K. And now you're not holding up to market, but you are doing the 510K, and you're submitting all the same documentation that was already in each of those engineering change notices. So that should really help you. So that takes me to the end of demonstrating what's in here. And we have a guest here. Thank you. It looks like it's my friend Munir at Easy Medical Device. This is only an internal document, so I suppose, yes, you should be honest filling this in. Well, hopefully our customers, our clients would be honest in filling out the internal and the external documents. But sometimes we write things in a way that we try to hide things, and we probably shouldn't. We just make ourselves a little deeper hole for later. But I know exactly what you mean there. Yeah. With these internal documents here, there's nobody immediately looking over your shoulder, so fill them in honestly. And you don't really want to set up your boss where I told you that we don't need to do a 510K, and then 6 months later the FDA says you're different, and your boss says, what's going on here? You said I didn't need to, and now we do. Set the expectations appropriately. Yes, you're very welcome. He was saying, I should actually show his thing here. So he says, great doing this video to help people. That's exactly right. We actually have clients that want to make changes. They ask us to help them fill in this and give them guidance on, would this be a yes or would this be a no? And sometimes what we're doing is saying, okay, you want to make all these changes. These changes here, I think, would be a letter to file. These changes would not be. And so they may choose, well, for this next trade show, we're going to make these 3 changes that are letter to file, and we're going to hold off on those other ones until after the trade show because we would have to get a 510K for those. So sometimes it's very strategic what changes you're going to make when, based on the timing of the year and what kind of marketing activities you're going to be doing. So that's something to keep in mind. But remember, when I was going through all that engineering change form, all the little things that had to be documented, you're really not doing a lot less work. It's pretty much the same amount of work, whether you're doing a letter to file or you're doing a 510K. The difference is the additional work is filling in the E-star and attaching the documents that were also attached to the engineering change note. That's the difference. And that doesn't take that much work. It's all the work doing all the validation in those test reports that really takes you the time. So think about this very carefully. It's really not a big difference. And everybody's like, well, what if the FDA doesn't approve us? Honestly, in 510Ks, if you've done the testing you're supposed to do, you got a 98, 99% chance of getting your 510K clearance first time through. That doesn't mean you won't get questions. It doesn't mean your submission won't be put on hold. It doesn't mean they won't ask you to change your instruction for use 10 times. That's not what I mean. I just mean the end outcome at the end of that 510K review will be, here's your clearance letter. So whether it took you 60 days and no questions, or it took you 180 days and a ton of questions, this outcome's the same. You got your clearance. So plan accordingly. I mean, we all want it early, but plan accordingly. If it's going to be a tough submission with a lot of changes, you probably ought to plan to start a little bit earlier and put more resources into it. And if you think it's a very minor change and you got no urgency, you can go at it a little less aggressively in your planning and resources. But it is important to do all that testing and all that documentation regardless. And I have clients tell me, like, if I had known how much documentation it was, I wouldn't have gone into medical devices. This is a regulated industry who are trying to save lives. This is not paperwork light. This is paperwork heavy. So I'm sorry that the submissions are 1,000 pages plus for a reason. And I'm not even sugarcoating it here. It's like 1,500 is the average 510K submission. In the record we've seen personally for our firm is 6,000, but Actually, when Zyoptics submitted their 510K for LASIX, that was on a pallet. So you don't have any submissions that are on pallets anymore. Everything's digital, but still, the number of pages would have filled up a pallet. So you're getting away light with the little submissions you're getting. So it's a lot of work, but it has to be done regardless of whether you do a 510K or if you do a letter to file. Either way, the engineering change notice is driving all the documentation. And this only determines whether you submit it to the FDA as a 510K or whether instead you say, no, we're just updating our technical documentation and no 510K is required. Okay, so I hope that answers all your questions about engineering change notices and letters to file and what's required. It's not just the letter to file, that's just one little piece. And if you buy this procedure, it comes with a training video that explains it and the forms, and you get the free updates for whenever we change it. And I am going to be making a change very soon here. I'm going to be adding in the stuff for Europe and Canada and a few other markets, because people have been asking me to add in not just the US market, but the other markets too. But the process is the same for documenting the engineering change. It's just making the decision, what do I report to the different notified bodies or competent authorities or Health Canada. It's whether I need to report it to those different countries, and each country is a little bit different. Okay, I hope that was helpful to everybody, and thank you, Munir, for joining us. Have a great day and great weekend. Bye-bye.